Hello. Thank you for attending today's Procurement Masterclass on how to utilize the micro-purchase method. My name is LaMonica Jones, and I am the Procurement and Purchasing Compliance Officer with Bright from the Start, Georgia Department of Early Care and Learning. Today is our second installment of the Procurement Masterclasses, where again we will be discussing how to utilize the micro-purchase method. In this webinar, we will review, number one, the definition of procurement, number two, the federal regulations governing procurement and micro-purchases, number three, the purpose of procurement, and number four, when and how to properly execute the micro-purchase method. Our learning objectives for the day are to understand how to successfully execute the micro-purchase procurement method, understanding federal regulations governing procurement standards for micro-purchases, and finally, increasing your understanding of micro-purchase procurement method via practical application steps. So let's get started. What is procurement? The definition of procurement is the process of obtaining goods and or services at the lowest, most competitive price possible. When thinking of procurement, I like to think of it in terms of what we do on a daily basis, how we purchase our household products, the items that we need in our personal lives, comparing prices, and purchasing using the lowest price possible from whom can provide exactly what I need. The purpose of procurement. The purpose of procurement is to maximize full, open, and free competition, to use responsive and responsible suppliers, to promote transparency, integrity, and fairness, to eliminate wasteful spending, to receive an overall better price for quality and value, and to ensure customer protection. Procurement standards. Our procurement standards can be found in 2 CFR, Part 200, 317 through 326. For the sake of this Procurement Masterclass, we will be beginning at Part 200 of 318, which states a non-federal entity, which is yourself, the sponsor institution, must use their own documented procurement procedures which reflect applicable federal, state, and local regulations. So in short, all sponsors and institutions, regardless of how or which procurement method you utilize for your food purchases, your food and non-food purchases, all sponsors and institutions must have a procurement policy on hand. In the event that you utilize formal procurement, I here in the DCAL offices would have to review that procurement policy, but if you utilize informal procurement, which would be small or micro purchase, I do not need to review that procurement policy, but you do need to have it on hand. And for your convenience, we have developed a procurement and purchasing policy template, which can be found on the DCAL website. If you search nutrition and then search through CACSP or SFSP program participant, and then scroll down to the procurement page. Once you reach the procurement page, at the bottom of the page, you will see a list of documents, and there is where you will find the procurement and purchasing policy template. It's a simple, fillable template where you only have to include your organization-specific information, so your program contact name and the name of your institution, as well as any program-specific information. So we ask that you do not take out anything, but you may add information into the template that makes sure, personalizes your procurement and purchasing policy and may make it more restrictive based off of how you purchase your food and non-food. Next, the institution or sponsor must maintain written standards code of conduct governing conflicts of interest and governing the actions of employees engaged in the selection, award, or administration of contracts. So the standard code of conduct describes the ethical behaviors during the procurement process and shall address the following: conflicts of interest, whether they are real or apparent; restriction of communication, this would be who you may be in contact with during the procurement process; less than arm's length arrangements or related parties. So if there is anyone who is a family member or who has a personal interest or gain in the award of a contract. This would be your less than arm's length arrangement or related party. The acceptance of gifts and gratuity, and then there should be an outline of the consequences of failing to comply with any of these standard codes of conduct. The institutional sponsor must also ensure they are not doing business with companies that are debarred or suspended from participating in child nutrition programs. A debarred organization is one that is prohibited from doing business with child nutrition programs versus an organization that is suspended, which is one that is temporarily prohibited from doing business with child nutrition programs. And for either one of these, whether they are debarred or suspended, in order to locate this information, you can log on to sam.gov, which is the System for Award Management. And this website, you can input the name of the vendor or the organization, and it will let you know if they are in fact debarred or suspended from doing business with child nutrition programs. In addition to SAM, there's also the NDL list, which is located on the DECAL website. And this again will give you information on whether or not a vendor, a supplier, or an organization is debarred or suspended from doing business with a child nutrition program. Procurement regulations. The federal requirement regarding procurement for the Child and Adult Food Care Program, or CACFP, can be found in 7 CFR 226.22. The federal requirement governing procurement for Summer Food Service Program, or SFSP, can be found in 7 CFR 225.17. And the general procurement standards, which govern all federal awards, can be found in the Office of Management and Budget, or OMB, Super Circular 2 CFR Part 200, 317 through 326, and this is what we are actually reviewing today. And for an electronic version of all of these federal regulations, they can be found in the Electronic Code of Federal Regulation at www.ecfr.gov. Now, on to micropurchase specifically. The regulation governing micropurchases can be found in 2 CFR 200.67, which reads, the purchase of supplies or services using simplified acquisition procedures and the aggregate amount of costs which do not exceed the micropurchase threshold. Micropurchase procedures are comprised of a subset of sponsors and institutions' small purchase procedures. The sponsor or institution uses such procedures in order to expedite the completion of its lowest dollar small purchase transaction and minimize the associated administrative burden and cost. And the micropurchase threshold is set by the Federal Acquisition Regulation, which states that the threshold is currently set at $10,000, which, if you did not know, this threshold increased over the summer. I believe it was June or July. You all should have received notification that the threshold moved from $3,500 to $10,000. So essentially, micropurchase is a more simplified method for purchasing the supplies that you need. It's not typically used on a regular basis unless that is actually the best method for purchasing your supplies, but it is a non-competitive method for those relatively small transactions that will fall underneath $10,000. A step-by-step guide to procurement. So when determining the procurement code to be followed, each institution will need to follow a code based on their type of institution, which we will see on the next slide. There are, based off of your type of institution, specific codes that you must follow. Number 2, sponsors and institutions must determine the amount of goods and or services needed. The total amount for the operating year for each good or services must be considered. And number 3, sponsors and institutions must determine the procurement method to perform a purchase and or contract. This amount will determine the type of procurement that must be conducted, whether it's formal or informal. So here we have the sheet that describes or that notes which regulation must be followed. So if we look at the second row, which states for public institutions, which would be local governments, all local governments must follow the program regulations found in 7 CFR 225 or 226, based off of which child nutrition program you are utilizing, whether it be CACFP or SFSP. And then again, all institutions and sponsors Regardless of type of institution, you must follow the general procurement rules, which are found in 2 CFR. And this is where it becomes more specific, the procurement code. So for public institutions, which are local governments, they must follow state or local procurement codes, except for provisions which are inconsistent with federal procurement requirements. So state or local codes must be more stringent than federal. So for example, if we have a state institution, let's just say school districts. School districts would fall underneath this procurement code. In some school districts, although the small purchase threshold federally is set at $250,000, a school district, which is run by the state, will have, it may have a code that says that small purchases are $100,000. So in that case, the very last line, which reads state or local codes must be more stringent than federal, school districts would have to follow the small purchase, which states that they cannot purchase anything over that $100,000 threshold. So that would be more stringent and more restrictive, and they must follow those codes. If you look over to the last column, which says the allowable cost rule, for public institutions, again, the 2 CFR Part 225, Subpart E, F, and S, Instruction 796-4. This is the instruction that public institutions or local government, and not school districts, this would be city government, they would follow this allowable cost rule. And for public schools, if you look at the line above, they would follow 2 CFR Part 220, Subpart E. But with either of those, and actually with all of these, no matter the type of institution, you must follow the procurement code in your organization's procurement codes that are more restrictive. Procurement methods. So in 2 CFR 200-320, this is where we discuss the procurement methods. When determining the best procurement method to choose, select the best method most aligned with how your purchases are made. While aggregate food and non-food costs are estimated on an annual basis according to your budget, the optimal method should be based on how you purchase your goods. But remember, no matter how or which procurement method is chosen, your procurement policy must reflect how you intend to purchase goods. So although you review your budget and you input your budget into Atlas on an annual basis, when determining which procurement method is most aligned with your organization, you're going to choose that method which best reflects how you purchase. So although your food cost could be $250,000, and according to regulations, you should be using formal procurement, if you as an organization have determined that it is better for you to purchase your goods on a monthly basis, which means each one of those monthly purchases is below $250,000. Let's just say each one of those monthly purchases equates to less than $10,000. If you determine that purchasing monthly and those costs are under $10,000, then you may proceed with micro purchase, because although your total annual costs have exceeded the small purchase threshold of $250,000, based on your organizational practices, the best method for procuring the goods that you need in order to maximize your purchases would be utilizing the micro purchase method. However, regardless of how you purchase, whether you opt for formal or informal, small or micro purchase, your procurement policy must reflect how you intend to purchase those goods. So in the event that a nutrition consultant arrives at your institution and they notice that your food costs are $250,000, if you fail to reflect the fact that you purchase on a monthly basis and each one of those monthly purchases falls underneath the $10,000 and you are utilizing micro purchase, there's a potential for you to be cited, because they will see that your food costs are over $250,000, which means that you should be purchasing according to using formal procurement. So please be sure that your procurement policy accurately reflects how you intend to purchase your food and non-food. And just as a caveat, your procurement policy is a workable document. So as your organizational practices change, purchasing practices change, if it's necessary for you to revise your procurement policy, please do so. You always want to make sure that you have a current procurement policy that most accurately reflects your current purchasing practices. So this is just a simple chart to map out the procurement process that you would utilize. So for example, we would start over to the left. Are your costs over the $250,000 threshold? In most cases, if it is yes, you will proceed with formal procurement. If the answer is no, you will proceed with informal, and then from there you would opt to choose small purchase based off of your food costs or micro purchase. Procurement methods. The following are a list of all of the available procurement methods. Again, today we will be discussing micro purchase, but underneath informal, you will find micro purchase and small purchase. There's also formal procurement, in which you could utilize an invitation for bid or a request for proposal. And the request for proposal is only for CACFP. You cannot utilize the RFP process for summer. And then there's non-competitive procurement and emergency purchase. We've already posted a procurement masterclass on small purchase, but we will be posting procurement masterclasses for each one of these procurement methods so that you have a more in-depth and thorough understanding of how to execute each method. On to micro purchase. Procurement by micro purchase is the acquisition of supplies and services in which the aggregate dollar amount of each purchase does not exceed $10,000. So each individual purchase that you make cannot exceed $10,000. To the extent practical, the institution or sponsor must distribute micro purchases equitably among qualified suppliers. So in short, this means that you must diversify the suppliers that you use for your purchases. You must rotate your vendors. So if you are purchasing from vendor A, if you purchase on a weekly basis, week number 1, if you purchase from vendor A, week 2, when you attempt to repurchase, you must purchase from vendor B. So there must be a complete rotation of these vendors unless there's an extenuating circumstance in which this is not practical for your sponsor, for your institution. So if there are no vendors in your area, if you know that you can constantly or consistently get, for example, milk for $1 cheaper, utilizing vendor A versus utilizing vendor B, you may continue to purchase your milk from vendor A without having to rotate your vendors. But this practice and this explanation must be documented. There must be some sort of documentation found in your weekly purchases so that in the event, again, a nutrition consultant arrives at your institution and they are reviewing your purchasing practices, if they were to pull out your invoices for month A and they notice that your procurement policy says that you are utilizing micro purchase and they know that you are to be distributing or diversifying your vendors and they notice that you are consistently buying from vendor A without rotating those vendors, and there is no notification within that file that states that vendor A consistently can provide the milk that you need cheaper than any other vendor in your area. Without that documentation and without that notification inside that file, you could be cited because it seems as if you are not properly executing the federal procurement practices required for CACFP or SFSP. And then lastly, micro purchases may be awarded without soliciting quotations from multiple sources if the organization considers the price to be reasonable. So micro purchases, you do not have to consult 2 to 3 vendors in the same manner that you would for small purchase, and you certainly don't have to go through the formal procurement process of soliciting bids, advertising for micro purchases. But there should be a process that you as an organization and as the purchaser goes through in order to ensure that you are getting the best possible price for the supplies that you are needing for your food program. To continue, purchases cannot be intentionally segregated to avoid acquiring goods and services utilizing applicable procurement methods. So if you are purchasing, let's again use milk for an example, If you know that you purchased $15,000 worth of milk in a week, you could not purchase $7,500 from vendor A and then $7,500 from vendor B, because that would seem as if you intentionally segregated your milk purchases to avoid having to utilize the small purchase procurement method. So it is okay if you want to categorize your goods. So if you have a milk vendor, a bread vendor, a produce vendor, maybe a meat vendor, it's okay if you want to categorize those vendors. However, it is not a proper procurement practice to intentionally segregate or to separate your milk purchases to avoid having to purchase according to the applicable procurement method. And again, your procurement policy must outline the intent to purchase goods and or services utilizing the procurement method and your intent to categorize. Okay, time for a quick activity. So in this activity, ABC Childcare is preparing to purchase food and non-food items for the 2018-2019 school year. Their annual food costs are $207,569. ABC Childcare makes weekly purchases for their meals. Based on how their food supplies are purchased, ABC Childcare has determined micro-purchase is the optimal method for their organization. So based on the purchases below, determine if ABC Childcare has followed the micro-purchase procurement method according to program and purchasing regulations. So what we have is the milk was purchased from Kids Dairy for $900. Canned goods were purchased from Canned Goods R Us for $8,547.58. Bread and bakery products were purchased from We Bake Bread Company for $5,458.58. Additional canned goods were purchased from Georgia Canning Company for $2,587.99. And the remaining food items, frozen foods, produce, were purchased from Peachtree Grocery for $9,589.77. So based off of the information that was provided, the purchases were compliant with the micro-purchase threshold. If we go back, we can see that each dollar amount fell underneath the $10,000 micro-purchase threshold. So each one, Peachtree Grocery came pretty close to exceeding $10,000, but they were still underneath that $10,000 micro-purchase threshold. ABC Childcare categorized their costs, which is acceptable. So if we go back once again, we see that they separated their costs. There was a milk vendor, they had a canned goods vendor, there was bread and a bakery products vendor, and then they did not categorize their frozen, their produce, maybe their spices, their regular grocery items, but this is acceptable. They could have, but they lumped all of those categories into one, which is acceptable so long as they did not purchase any more bread products, any other canned goods, or any other milk from Peachtree Grocery, which for the sake of this exercise, they did not. So the one error that we did find was that ABC Childcare purchased canned goods from two different vendors within that same day. And the amount for canned goods totaled $11,135.57. So the error that we noticed is the micro-purchase threshold was violated. So if we go back once more, and we see that the purchases that were made from Canned Goods R Us totaled $8,547.58, plus the additional canned goods that were purchased from Georgia Canning Company for $2,587.99. If we total those up, we see that they exceeded the threshold, the micro-purchase threshold by $1,135.57. And this is a prohibited practice because they should have utilized the small purchase procurement method, which would be contacting 2 to 3 vendors and awarding those canned goods to the lowest price vendor. And then the other error that was found was that they intentionally separated those 2 canned goods. So they separated it. They purchased from Canned Goods R Us as well as from Georgia Canning Company. They separated those two food costs, and so that separation is actually an avoidable practice. So they should have kept those two purchases together and then again proceeded with the small purchase method because those costs were over $11,000. Now, in the event that they would have purchased from Canned Goods R Us and say they needed canned peaches, canned apples, and maybe canned tomatoes for their meal service for the week, but Canned Goods R Us didn't have those items, it is an acceptable practice to purchase the items that were unavailable from Canned Goods R Us from Georgia Canning Company. So if there is ever an instance where you have the intent to purchase all of your canned goods or all of the items in this one category from vendor A, and you found out that vendor A cannot provide you 100% of what it is that you need for your meal service for the week, you are able to purchase from an additional vendor in order to purchase the items that you need, but you just will need, again, to make sure that you document. So in this example, the sponsor, ABC Childcare, there should have been a note within that file for the weekly purchase that stated Canned Goods R Us couldn't provide canned peaches, canned apples, and canned tomatoes for the week, so we had to purchase from Georgia Canning Company. And that would have been an acceptable practice because the documentation was there, and in the event a nutrition consultant arrived at their institution, they could see that, yes, the procurement policy says that they will categorize, and yes, they will be utilizing micro-purchase, but we had a situation arise, and vendor A cannot provide what we needed, so we purchased the supplies from vendor B. So just be sure that you document all your purchasing practices in the event that there is an extenuating circumstance that prohibits you from following exactly what your procurement policy states, and in the event that you have to purchase, you partake in an activity that is against or doesn't 100% follow the federal regulation. So for a quick review, when determining which procurement to use, you always want to start with assessing your need. Procurement by micro-purchase is the acquisition of supplies or services in which the aggregate dollar amount of each purchase does not exceed $10,000. To the extent practical, the institution or sponsor must distribute micro-purchases equitably among qualified vendors, so you must rotate the vendors that you use. And if you are unable to rotate those vendors, there must be documentation found within your weekly purchases, your monthly purchase, that explains why you are unable to rotate those purchases. Micro purchases may be awarded without soliciting quotations from multiple sources if the organization considers the price to be reasonable. So for micro purchase, quotes are not necessary. There is definitely no bidding process that is required with micro purchase, but there must be an internal practice to ensure that you are purchasing from the vendor who is able to provide you with your food items at the best cost possible. Purchases cannot be intentionally segregated to avoid acquiring goods and services utilizing the applicable procurement method. So looking back at the example from ABC Childcare, in that situation, that sponsor or institution, they separated their canned good purchases to avoid having to utilize the small purchase procurement method because their food cost for that particular category was over $10,000. So you cannot intentionally separate your categories to avoid procuring according to the correct procurement method. Sponsors and institutions are allowed to categorize to the extent practical, and the procurement policy must outline the intent to purchase goods and or services utilizing the procurement method. And it's not just the procurement method. Your procurement policy must outline how you plan to purchase whichever method you utilize to purchase your supplies. So this is it for this procurement masterclass on how to purchase utilizing the micro-purchase method. And again, my name is LaMonica Jones, and I'm the Procurement and Purchasing Compliance Officer. If you have any questions or any comments, please feel free to contact me via email or by phone. I will be available to answer any questions that you have. And please stay tuned and look forward to the other procurement masterclasses that we will be hosting. Again, we have already recorded the small purchase, which is currently available on our website. So please feel free if you have any questions or if you need a review on how to purchase utilizing the small purchase procurement method, please review that. And this will be posted shortly on how to purchase utilizing micro purchase. And again, thank you so much for your attention.